Shana Tova. As you know, I usually prefer to begin a sermon with a light story, an observation, an anecdote, but that's not this year. This is a different year, a year that began not really with the sounding of the shofar, but with the sounding of the sirens in Israel on October 7th. And then just 2 days ago, the year concluded with more sirens from the brazen attack from Iran. And now, with the uncertainty of what comes next, with thousands of Israeli families still displaced from their homes, with 101 souls still held captive in hell, and with the outbreak of anti-Semitism all around us, this year, despite the apples and honey, it's hard to find the sweetness. So there are no jokes or light stories. Instead, I want to begin by sharing the first time I remember hearing the word Auschwitz. When I was a small boy, my family used to go visit Norma and Manny's. They were longtime family friends. Norma and Manny were a good deal older than my parents, more from my grandparents' generation, really, and they spoke with thick accents. I never really gave it much thought until one time we were invited to Norma and Manny's for a Sunday brunch. After lunch, I cleared the table and Norma headed over to the sink to start the dishes. When I brought over a stack of plates, Norma turned on the water and rolled up her sleeves. "What's that?" I pointed to the numbers on her arm. Norma quickly covered up, turned off the water, turned to me, and reluctantly shared, "That's what the Nazis did to me in Auschwitz." Then she put a hand on my cheek and added, "But you are lucky, Boychuk. America is different." That was the very first time in my life I heard of Auschwitz. And I asked my parents a lot of questions on the way home, and I struggled to understand what Norma had been through. My desire to learn more about the Holocaust stretched through the next several decades. The more I learned, the more I truly believed what Norma told me. America is different. When I decided to apply to rabbinical school, I remember thinking that, unlike rabbis of generations past, I didn't need to worry about the hatred of Jews. On the high holidays, I would never need to give a sermon about anti-Semitism. After all, Norma was right. America is different. And while I still believe that the overwhelming majority of Americans are good people, and that this country has provided the Jewish people with unprecedented opportunities for advancement, we've been through a lot these past few years. Charlottesville, Colleyville, Pittsburgh, Poway. And even locally, I felt things changing. One day, Lisa, an energetic teenager, with a radiant smile, came to my office in my old shul with tears in her eyes. She wanted to talk to me about something that happened to her at the local high school the previous day. They threw pennies at me, she told me. They called me a dirty Jew. I was speechless. I asked Lisa if we could talk more about it in the upcoming confirmation class, and she agreed. When we explained to the rest of the class what had happened, few of them were surprised. Some of them even shared similar stories. I was shocked. I told the class about Norma. They didn't share my conviction that she was right. Fast forward to this past year and the aftermath of October 7th, when the hatred just poured out. Professionals in our community told me about the casual comments in the office. Students at college told me about the encampments. My son's friend on the football team at a Jewish high school told me what he was called after making a good tackle in a game. And even here, on our very own synagogue campus, we felt the sting of hatred. In some circles, it's more passive. It's what is said in all but the words. And in other circles, it's direct and vile. All this makes me reconsider what I learned from Norma so many years ago. Was she correct? I do not believe that we are living in the contemporary equivalent of Germany in the 1930s. But here I am, it's the high holidays, and I, along with every rabbi in America, is giving a sermon on anti-Semitism. Today, I don't want to rattle off the statistics from the ADL, which are deeply concerning. I don't want to tell horror stories, and I'll talk more about Israel over Yom Kippur. Instead, this morning, I want to focus on how we should confront the anti-Semitism we are facing. Today, I'm going to offer 3 suggestions on how we can confront anti-Semitism as we move forward into this new year. For my first suggestion, I want to tell you about a conversation I recently had with a stranger sitting next to me on a plane this summer. When I go on a plane, I go Jewish incognito. I cover my kippah with a baseball hat. And I also like to keep to myself, so I wear the headphones and I keep my eyes glued on a book. But on this flight, the woman sitting next to me was visibly bored and outmaneuvered me and kind of leaning over to get a peek at what I was reading. And she saw it was a Jewish book. She tapped my arm. Sorry to bother you. With everything going on in the world, I want to let you know that I am a teacher, and with my 8th graders, we read Anne Frank. I think that's great. Thank you for doing that. You know what my favorite part of the diary is? I shrugged my shoulders, but I knew what she was going to say even before it came out of her mouth. According to the teacher, her favorite part in the diary, of course, is the ending, when Anne Frank writes, "I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are truly good at heart." When the teacher told me this, I must have made a face. "What's wrong?" she asked me. I had just read Dara Horn's latest book, People Love Dead Jews. and I found myself parroting Horn's critique of that precise passage. "Well," I said to the teacher, "I'm wondering if you think Anne Frank still believed that people are good at heart a few weeks later when she was gassed to death at Auschwitz." The teacher muttered something and quickly turned away from me. We didn't really talk for the rest of the flight. Of course, I know I should have kept my mouth shut because she was a stranger. But we're family, and we need to talk about this because I think Dara Horn makes a good point. This is what Horn writes about the final passage of Anne Frank's diary. "These words are inspiring, by which we mean that they flatter us. They make us feel forgiven for those lapses of our civilization that allow for piles of murdered girls. It is far more gratifying to believe that an innocent dead girl has offered us grace than to recognize the obvious." Frank wrote about people being truly good at heart before meeting people who weren't. 3 weeks after writing those words, she met people who weren't. This leads to my first suggestion about how we should confront anti-Semitism. Anne Frank's last words have been instrumentalized to graft a hopeful message upon the Holocaust. The diary's ending lets everyone close the book with nice thoughts and fluffy feelings. The goodness of Anne Frank is a red herring that distracts from the dark reality that 6 million of our people were methodically slaughtered. And just as the story of the Holocaust is not the closing line of Anne Frank's diary, I feel the same way about the anti-Semitism we currently face. Certainly, there are positives. There are so many people who support us and who care about us. We have both allies and true friends. But that is not the story of the day. The story of the day is that anti-Semitism is real. It's pernicious, it's widespread, and it's a threat. That is why today, on Rosh Hashanah, I plead with you, let's not Anne Frank anti-Semitism. To Anne Frank anti-Semitism is to naively focus on hope and goodness while turning a blind eye to the darkness. We Anne Frank anti-Semitism when we quickly close our eyes in the presence of hatred because it's too painful. We Anne Frank anti-Semitism when we excuse hatred of Jews as simple misunderstandings. We Anne Frank anti-Semitism when we allow people to think that calls from the river to the sea is about raising up Palestinians instead of eradicating Israel and murdering Jews. We Anne Frank anti-Semitism when we righteously proclaim that all types of political violence are unacceptable, but somehow excuse cries for an intifada because they come from an aggrieved people. We Anne Frank anti-Semitism when we allow things to be said about Jews that would be absolutely intolerable if said about any other group or minority. And we Anne Frank anti-Semitism when instead of demanding better from people who vote like us, we immediately deflect, maintaining that unlike the other side, our side of the political street is clean. The hope of Anne Frank is inspiring and should not be forgotten. But the hope for humanity from the sweet soul of a child does not represent the grim reality of the Holocaust. And just as the light of Anne Frank does not obscure the dark blot of the Shoah, today we cannot allow a whitewashing of the true threat of anti-Semitism. The challenge that we face is real and dangerous, it's complex, and it's spreading. We will need conviction, strength, determination, and endurance. Let's be sober to that reality. Let's not Anne Frank anti-Semitism. For my second suggestion on how to confront anti-Semitism, I want to teach you a little Talmud. The Talmud presents a hypothetical scenario. Two people are walking along in the desert, but they only have enough water for one person to survive. Im shotim shnehem meitim, v'im shotay echad mehem magia leyeshuv. So if you're in that situation, what do? Do you drink? Or do you give the water to the other person knowing that you'll die? Do you share the water and both die? What do? Rabbi Akiva comes along and offers an opinion that firmly establishes the normative Jewish view. You drink the water and survive. It's like what they say on the planes about the oxygen masks. Put the mask on yourself before putting the mask on others. Like the airlines, Rabbi Akiva understood that you can only be of service to others if you first take care of yourself and live. Rabbi Akiva's teaching is instructive to us today. We all receive solicitations from many worthwhile organizations involved in holy and important work, assisting the unhoused, feeding the hungry, access to education for the less privileged. These are causes that I deeply believe in and I feel their value in my soul. But friends, if we don't give to those causes, others will. Yet if we don't give to Jewish causes, if we don't donate to help Israel, nobody will. Right now, unfortunately, we are living at a time when we are beginning to gasp for oxygen. The need is pressing and the time is urgent. And so for now, while not ignoring the person sitting next to us on the plane, before we can help them, we need to help ourselves. I recently heard a podcast where the head of the Reform movement, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, was interviewed about Israel. And in the interview, Rabbi Jacobs extolled the incredible job that many more liberal Jewish organizations and synagogues have done in teaching our obligation to the others for the sake of tikkun olam, repairing the world. And then Rabbi Jacobs questioned if in service to teaching universal values like tikkun olam, we neglected particularistic values like standing in solidarity with our people. Like Rabbi Jacobs, I wonder if over the years we fail to stress the important lesson of Rabbi Akiva and the oxygen mask. God willing, in short time, this terrible period will pass, and with our masks on and oxygen assured, with a healthy and secure Jewish people, we will be able to continue helping others because the work of a Jew is to care about the world. That's what it means to be a chosen people. Remember that today is Rosh Hashanah. It's one of our holiest days, and it's a day that we celebrate the creation of the entire world, not just the Jewish people. But for now, if we don't recognize the dire hour, if we fail to put the oxygen masks on our people, we will never be in a position to help others because we will be gone. God willing, there will be better days ahead. But for now, the hour summons us to stand with our people. This brings me to my third suggestion for how we should confront anti-Semitism. It's advice that comes from the town where my family is from in Poland. As you may remember, my grandfather came from a town outside of Krakow. It's called Tarnow. And he fled to America sometime before Hitler invaded. 10 or so years before my grandfather moved from Tarnow to the Lower East Side, another resident of Tarnow, Salo Baron, left Poland for New York and a prestigious position teaching at Columbia University. In America, Baron's career flourished, and he is widely considered one of the greatest historians of 20th century Jewish life. Even though he left Poland well before Hitler's rise to power, Salo Baron was no stranger to anti-Semitism. In fact, following the Shoah, Baron was called upon to testify at the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem. At the trial, Baron testified that before the Nazis, 20,000 Jews called Tarnow home. The vast majority of them were murdered by the Nazis, including Baron's own parents and sister. And while Baron dedicated his life to holding the Nazis accountable for their crimes, he is best remembered for cautioning against the adoption of what he calls the lachrymose conception of Jewish history. In other words, Baron, a man of history who understood anti-Semitism in his head and felt its sting in his heart, refused to concede that the great story of the Jewish people is anti-Semitism. According to Baron's thinking, rejecting the lachrymose conception of Jewish history means not allowing the ois of anti-Semitism to eclipse the great joys of Judaism. Anti-Semitism is something that happens to us, but it does not define us. And it is with the inspiration of Salo Baron that I wish to challenge us. At this dark hour, we must confront anti-Semitism with full determination. And if the bitterness of anti-Semitism monopolizes our Jewish experience, the anti-Semites will have won. We cannot allow the ois of anti-Semitism to eclipse over 3,000 years of spirituality, ethics, legal thought, literary achievement, culture, and ritual. That is a steep price. It's too steep. Personally, I always think it's a shame when people become experts on anti-Semitism, knowing every statistic. They know about every known Jew hater and their sphere of influence. But that same person remains ignorant of the difference between an aleph and a bet, or the kiddush and the kaddish. And so as we engage in this serious and critical battle against anti-Semitism, I want to invite you to simultaneously enjoy and explore the richness of Judaism. This year, we're offering new classes for teens. We're offering a class on the Talmud. We're starting a Shabbat Torah study. We're continue reading with the Rabbi, MID, and Bayit Bunch, which is a learning cohort for preschool parents. Come dance at Narada. And coming later this year, every week, come for a Shabbat Kiddush lunch and stay for an afternoon filled with activities. Or just come to hang out in our newly refurbished Deli's garden. As we deal with the serious implications and all the oys of anti-Semitism, let's celebrate the joys of Judaism. This Rosh Hashanah is a challenging one. Deep darkness has descended upon our people. We all feel it, and many of us wonder whether Norma was correct. Is America different? The question remains unanswered, but what is very clear is that this year, we simply cannot stand back pretending all is well and all is good. The cruelty of the world does not afford us that luxury. Instead, let us bravely confront the challenge ahead by refusing to Anne Frank anti-Semitism as we embrace the responsibility of standing in solidarity with the Jewish people while not allowing the oys of anti-Semitism to overwhelm the joys of Judaism. May the memory of Norma and those who bravely faced down anti-Semitism in the past inspire us for the struggle at hand in the present, so one day in the future, we can fully embrace the sweetness of the new year in our bodies and in our souls with gladness and joy to share with the entire world. L'shana tova tikatevu. May it be a better year for the Jewish people.